You should have listened to Noah. He told you it was going to rain. It did too, didn't it? I was preaching in Denver, Colorado one time. And some guys came to the meeting and they said, now, Mr. Hovind, we know you teach the earth is 6,000 years old. We would like to prove to you you're wrong. Would you come with us, please? These guys took me to the Denver National Ice Core Laboratory at the Federal Center. They said, now we go to the North Pole, or actually to Greenland, and to the South Pole, and we drill holes through the ice. We bring up the center part of the hole and we store it in the freezer right here. They gave me one of those huge suits about this thick and a big hat and everything else, and I walked in there and in a few seconds I was freezing. It's 36 below zero in that freezer. They said, now Mr. Hovind, we took the ice cores from Greenland and Antarctica and we saved them here in the freezer. We drill holes with this coring machine and we bring up the center part and we bring them back and put them in the freezer here in Lakewood, Colorado in the Federal Center. They took me into the freezer and showed me the ice cores. They said, well, you see these rings on here? Dark and light and dark and light, sort of like tree rings. I said, yep, I see them. They said, you see, Mr. Hovind, what happens up in Greenland, in the summer the snow melts a little bit and it refreezes and makes clear ice, shows up dark here. In the winter the snow packs, doesn't get a chance to freeze or doesn't get a chance to melt, and so it shows up light here because it's compressed and has the air bubbles in it. So they said what these are is annual rings, and they represent summer, winter, summer, winter, summer, winter, summer, winter. They said, now we counted these annual rings in the deepest hole we ever drilled, which was 10,000 feet, and there were 135,000 annual rings. And here you are telling everybody the earth is 6,000 years old, and we can prove it's 135,000. I said, fellas, aren't you assuming those are annual rings? See, they did not know about the Lost Squadron, but some airplanes ran out of gas during World War II and landed in Greenland. And so they forgot about them until 1990, when some rich guy from Kentucky got the brilliant idea to go get those airplanes off the ice. Brand new World War II airplanes. Well, it wasn't quite that easy. They found them using ground-penetrating radar because the airplanes were under 263 feet of ice in 48 years. They melted holes down to get to the airplane. They picked one they thought was in the best shape, a P-38, and took it apart and brought the pieces back up through the hole and put it back together in Middleborough, Kentucky. I've been there and seen it. I talked to the guy who dug the airplane out. His name is Bob Cardin. I said, Bob, explain this to me now. Those airplanes were in the ice for 48 years. They were 263 feet down. That's 5.5 feet a year of ice on top of the planes. The deepest hole drilled to core sample is 10,000 feet. If you divide that by 5.5, that's 1,800 years. Now, I know the deeper layers get squished, you know, glacial fern and all that stuff, so really 4,400 is plenty of time to allow for all the ice at the North and South Pole. So I went and met Bob and said, Bob, explain this to me. What about these ice rings? I said, when you melted down to get to the airplane, did you notice rings in the ice, you know, dark and light and dark and light? He said, well, yeah, there are many hundreds of them. I said, how do you get hundreds of annual rings in 48 years? He said, those aren't annual rings. They don't represent summer, winter, summer, winter, summer, winter. They represent warm, cold, warm, cold, warm, cold. And you can get 10 of those in 1 week up there in Greenland. Those aren't annual rings. But some guy in Scientific American is still calling them annual rings in 1998. Now, either he's ignorant or he's a liar. I hope he's just ignorant, because ignorance can be fixed. Stupid is forever. That's the difference, by the way. A guy that works with the Eskimos wrote me a letter and said, Brother Hovind, I got 15 layers of snow on my car in 8 hours. Not 15 inches. 15 layers of snow. The layers formed rapidly in the ice, and also the layers formed rapidly in the geologic strata of the earth. All over the world we find petrified trees standing up, running through multiple layers. You kids are going to be taught each layer is a different age, you know, Cenozoic, Mesozoic, Paleozoic. It is pure baloney. Watch my video number 4 for lots more on that. Also, they're going to tell you it takes millions of years for things to petrify. No, it doesn't. Things petrify very quickly. Here's a piece of petrified firewood where somebody had chopped on it. I doubt they chopped on it after it was petrified. We have lots of stuff on that on videotape, number 6. Anyway, the Mississippi River is depositing sediments at the rate of 80,000 tons every hour. 80,000 tons of mud every hour comes down the Mississippi and dumps off in New Orleans. And that delta is growing larger and larger and larger. Scientists have studied the delta. They say it probably took 30,000 years to put all that mud out there. Okay, well then I have a question. If the earth is, millions of years old, why isn't the whole Gulf of Mexico full of mud by now? One preacher from Louisiana wrote me a letter and said, Brother Hovind, I was drilling for an oil company in the Gulf of Mexico. We drilled through 14,000 feet of mud, and we hit a tree. And drilled right through a tree under 14,000 feet of mud. See, folks, I can explain the delta in the Mississippi. About 6,000 years ago, God made everything. 4,400 years ago, there was a flood. As the flood water was running off, about half that mud washed out there in 20 minutes. So it looks like it took 30,000 years. No, they forgot the flood. Here's a picture of the oldest tree in the world here in Southern California, up in the White Mountains. It's a bristlecone pine tree. It's called the Methuselah tree. This textbook says the oldest tree in the world is 4,300 years old. That's pretty old. But I have a question. If the earth is millions of years old, why don't we have an older tree someplace? Why is the oldest tree 4,300 years old? Well, I have a theory about that. Here's my theory. I believe about 6,000 years ago, God made everything, and 4,400 years ago, there was a flood, and it wrecked everything. So I predict the biggest and oldest tree in the world will be less than 4,400 years old. It is. Here's a picture of a coral reef growing underwater. The largest reef in the world is in Australia. It's called the Great Barrier Reef. I got a call from a church in Brisbane, and they said, would you like to come preach over here? I said, I need to pray about this. He said, yes. Well, when you're close, the answer is quick, So I went over and preached in Brisbane, Australia. I got to go scuba diving with my daughter at the Great Barrier Reef. It was absolutely incredible. During World War II, some of the reef was destroyed by ships and anchors and bombs and stuff like that. So the environmentalist wackos went out there to see how fast it grows back. They watched it grow for 20 years. It was a government project. After watching it grow for 20 years, they said the Great Barrier Reef is less than 4,200 years old. That's pretty old. But I have a question. If the earth is millions of years old, why don't we have an older reef someplace? Why is the oldest reef in the world only 4,200 years old or less? I have a theory about that. I bet you know what it is, don't you? That flood, that's what did it. Here's a picture of Niagara Falls. Notice what the textbook says. Boys and girls, the rocky ledge above Niagara Falls has been eroding for nearly 9,900 years. Now, how do they know that? Well, actually, it's pretty simple. The rocks are breaking off the edge, and the falls is eating its way backwards. All waterfalls do that. The Canadians built a concrete wall on their side to make sure it erodes American soil instead of Canadian soil. Anybody out there Canadian, eh? Hey, all right, a couple of Canadians, all right. The rocks are breaking off the edge, and the waterfalls eats its way south. It's actually moving back 4.7 feet a year, according to the museum guide. Now, things have changed since they diverted most of the water for hydroelectric power, but up until that time, it was about 4.7 feet a year. When Charlie Lyle went there, he looked at Niagara Falls, which is way back here, and he knew it started way out here at the cliff, and he said, wow, it's 35,000 years old. The people that were with him there said, Charlie, we live here. It erodes much faster than you're figuring. It's a whole lot less than 35,000. But Charlie Lyle was devoted to destroying the Bible. He wanted real bad to get folks to not believe the Bible, and he was a strong influence on a young man named Sir Charles Darwin. But Lyle was a liar, and he wrote several books, which I've got down here on the table. But anyway, he said, well, 35,000 years old, because the waterfall's been moving backwards. That just simply is not true. The fact is, the water goes over the gorge, over the falls, into the gorge called the Niagara Gorge, which is